Good evening and welcome to Political Edge. My name is Hajra Marji. Nelson Mandela, that is a name known worldwide. An extraordinary leader, an icon amongst icons. But what else does the world know about South Africa? That in some cities over 40 people are murdered every day, that corruption is how much of business is done, and that big companies around the world are wary of investment. We thought it's time to sit down with China, Britain, Russia, Brazil, and the United Kingdom and hold a mirror up to ourselves and help the world better understand South Africa. Joining me on my panel is Maiti Nkwane Mashabane, the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, the Russian ambassador to South Africa, Mikhail Petrakov, Zhuanshao Tian from China, the UK's Judith McGregor, Brazil's Pedro Mendonça, as well as India's Virendra Gupta. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. Let's get started with our Minister of International Relations. Tell us about some of South Africa's big diplomatic and trade successes over the last 5 years.
Well, thanks and good evening to the viewers, Hajra. I really would not refuse the temptation to start exactly where you started. What does the world know about South Africa, and what does South Africa know about the world? I can say that with humility, I sit here and as one of the products of this South Africa that now knows freedom for the past 20 years. And I now know that South Africa is a better place to live in the world. The South Africa of Mandela that walked out of some prison gates out of this very city a few years ago. I now know that South Africa is a better place, the South Africa of Mandela, because the world knows of South Africa during the time of our struggle, because there was O.R. Tambo, because there was Johnny McCartney, that the president referred to, and many other contemporaries and freedom fighters who championed international solidarity. So we are the products, you and I and many fellow South Africans, products of our people's struggles and products of international solidarity.
Let me turn my attention to a big trading partner of South Africa historically, which is Britain. A British economist, Gavin Chait, wrote recently, the sort of investors South Africa really needs, those who would want to put down roots and invest in plant and production. Those are the ones least likely to do so at the moment. Those who are attracted to the country because of something it has that no one else has, not even them are coming to South Africa. I'm not seeing much mining investment. This leaves investors who feel that they can only gain advantage from a corrupt regime. Does the British government think there's merit in that argument?
Well, I can't say I've personally experienced what you're describing. One of the first things I did when I came was to attend the opening of a new British investment in a diamond mine, Venetia, in Limpopo. And President Zuma opened that, and it was a very remarkable underground investment in what had been open cast mining. I was in the mining in Indaba a week ago here in Cape Town, and I think there was a lot of interest and a lot of investment which is still being taken through. UK investment in South Africa is very considerable. We are over 50% of FDI in South Africa. And in my experience, briefly here, I see British companies very interested and wanting to expand that. British companies, I think, like other companies, are very keen to have the best possible business environment. They look to work very closely with the South African government and private institutions to do that. But no, I mean, I think there is a very good interest and climate and appetite for taking that further. And that's certainly been reflected in our trade as well.
Now, in terms of dealing with our unemployment problem in the country, the global economic recession has been blamed for why we haven't been able to create as many jobs as we should have. And we export a lot to Europe, and the downturn in Europe has been blamed for why we haven't been able to create jobs. Do you think that's a fair justification or excuse?
I think undoubtedly, the economic climate from 2009 onwards has affected all of us. I mean, in Europe, we felt that acutely. I think it's obvious in the trade statistics of very many countries, in fact, probably all the countries here today. But I think at the same time, I mentioned the 10 billion UK investment. That's probably been responsible for 250,000 jobs in South Africa. And we're continuing to work very closely with the South African government on the whole employability and skills agenda. We've got some specific programs which are designed to help both countries improve their graduates' abilities to get jobs. It's a complex mix. You need many things. But I think that, yes, I think the downturn is in part responsible, but I think all of the governments recognise the need to grasp the mettle now and to create programs, to create investment, to create a more settled business environment in which investors will have that confidence.
Thanks. Let's go from historic to our currently our biggest trading partner, to China, Ambassador Jian Zhushao. Do you see South Africa as a gateway to Africa? Are you investing in South Africa because you want to be in other parts of Africa?
Yes. Now China and South Africa economic trade cooperation is very good. The momentum of cooperation is very strong. I just to give you an example. Last year, China-South Africa trade reached $65.1 billion US dollars, almost 1/3 of China-Africa trade. China has become South Africa's largest trading partner for 5 consecutive years, and the largest export market of South Africa, and the largest source of import for South Africa. Also China's investment in South Africa is almost 1/4 of China's total in African continent. There's a strong enthusiasm, interest of Chinese business community to increase their economic and trade activities in South Africa. What's more, they take South Africa as an important gateway to our cooperation towards African countries. And our enterprises also like to join hands with South Africa. We work together to cooperate with other African countries to strengthening the economic cooperation and also to accelerate the process of integration of Africa.
Now, China refers to South Africa as a strategic partner in Africa as well as a friend. Will that friendship extend to backing South Africa, for example, when the Bank of the BRICS countries comes into order?
Yeah. Now, China, South Africa are good friends, good brothers, and good partners. We have established comprehensive strategic partnership. This partnership is mutual support. So as friends, South Africa give China strong support in many fields. It's vice versa. So as good friends, we will do whatever we can to support South Africa in its economic, social development, also in its role in the international arena.
So no comment for now. Let's move to your neighbor, to Russia, Mikhail Petrikov. Trade between Russia and South Africa is zero. South Africa to Russia is 0.4%. Are there plans to open up the Russian market for South Africa going forward, the way China has, for example?
Russia, South African trade is really growing fairly fast. You were speaking in percentage terms. I'll speak in absolute figures. 2 years ago, it was very small. It was about 500 million US dollars. These days, the end of 2013, it is over $1 billion. It is not much. We cannot compare it to the trade our British or Chinese colleagues have with South Africa, but the rate of growth is very high. And we do intend to continue the same. We are very interested in South Africa. It is our great partner historically and economically. We want to have more economic cooperation with this country. We are now taking action to open our trade office in Johannesburg this year, and we do hope that this will help us to further increase our trade and economic relationship.
How would you describe the relationship between the Kremlin and the South African government?
The relationship is very good, very cordial, and very close. Our relationship with South Africa, goes back to the times of the fight against apartheid. And coming back to what you've started with, what we know about South Africa and what South Africa knows about the world, you know that the Soviet Union, Russia, helped a lot during the apartheid times. And we do remember those courageous and heroic people who fought against apartheid. Nelson Mandela is a great figure whom we remember. Immediately after his death, I started receiving letters from common Russians expressing their grief and their sorrow and condolences. But not only that, Moses Kotane, J.B. Marks, Ivan Jones are the three great personalities who are buried at Moscow's one of the most sacred places at Novodevichy Cemetery. And this is an important psychological and in a way moral link with South Africa, which underpins our close relationship as well.
A difficult question now for Brazil, Pedro Mendonça. Right now you have blackouts in Brazil. You have police shooting at protesters. According to some reports, we're seeing that over 1,000 protesters have been shot by police. We're still unclear about what happened in that incident, but similar events happened in South Africa in recent years. Do you think the world unfairly judges South Africa?
The big problem we have as countries of the South is that information tends to be given by news agents of the North. And in most cases, they don't reflect the life in our countries. I must say, once again, I'm staggered by what you say, because I follow the Brazilian press. I watch Brazilian television in South Africa. I've never heard of anything like that.
Brazil's economic success in terms of being able to create jobs and deal with inequality. What are the lessons South Africa can learn from that?
That is a question that I'm put very often here in South Africa. I think that realities are very different, and each country must find its own way. We had I think that President Lula's public policies of income distribution were extremely successful. But they only apply to Brazil in the Brazilian context. Beginning with, let's say, the structure of power in Brazil, the way the administration, the national administration relates with the local administration is completely different from South Africa. So we are always very, very happy to hear of South African interest in sort of getting to know Brazilian experience. But it's very difficult to say what you should do. The South Africans should know what's best for them. You have very successful social policies as well, both income and housing policies. I think it's quite remarkable, and also in public health concerning HIV/AIDS.
And last but not least, to Virendra Gupta, South Africa and India share a lot of the same socio-economic problems. What are the lessons that South Africa can learn from India in terms of how to deal with some of those socio-economic problems?
Well, both our countries are developing economies, and we are multicultural, and we have the same issues, as you rightly said. Our cooperation is very vibrant. We have very dynamic trade and economic relations. Our trade is reaching about $15 billion per annum. And there is also a very large investment flows both ways, from India to South Africa and from South Africa to India. And these are opportunities for cooperation, for enterprises to learn from each other. And I think this fertilization is taking place all the time. And I'm very happy that it's building upon a very unique relationship that has existed between our two countries, historic in many respects. As you know, you referred to Mandela. And Mandela is someone who's widely respected and admired in India for many qualities that he showed us, but for the message of reconciliation and peace, despite long oppression and bitterness. And many of us see in Mandela a reflection of Mahatma Gandhi. As you know, Mahatma Gandhi also stayed in South Africa for 20 years, over 20 years, for which every Indian is indebted and grateful to people of South Africa and South Africa as a country. So our relationship with South Africa is very, very unique, and we share a lot in common.
India's democracy is a lot more entrenched than that of South Africa's. This year we celebrate 20 years of democracy. How do you view the challenges facing South Africa's democracy to date?
Well, I wouldn't say that South Africa's democracy is any less entrenched than the democracy in India. We're very proud of democracy in India, and I'm sure people in South Africa are also very proud of democracy here. In fact, for all I can see, there is a very healthy debate, there is an open debate, and I see democratic temper everywhere. So I think South Africa has given a very good account. If I were to generalize, in fact, going beyond South Africa, I'm greatly admire the manner in which democracy has taken roots in the whole of Africa. And I often say that this is much more than what many other regions of the world have done for themselves.
Would Mahatma Gandhi be proud?
Absolutely.
Now, our diplomats are being very nice to each other around the table as expected. After the break, I'm going to try to step out of the conversation and let them debate amongst themselves. We'll be back right after this. Let's go to China up front and how China views corruption in South Africa, or allegations of corruption or perceptions that the business in South Africa is done through corruption.
I think yesterday President Zuma, in his union address, said South Africa is a much better place to live in. I think all of us share the view that South Africa is a much better place to live in. South Africa has made tremendous achievements in social progress, economic development, and ethnic harmony through the joint efforts of South African people under the leadership of ANC government in the last 20 years. Recently, just a few days ago, Chinese Minister of Science and Technology came to South Africa to attend the first meeting of BRICS Science Technology Ministers. He told me he visited South Africa in the year 2007. This time, he found remarkable progress have been made in South Africa. So we feel very happy for the achievements South Africa has made. And South Africa, in fact, has played an exemplary role for many developing countries. There are some problems, but I feel very glad that...
What are the problems?
For example, there is some red tape, also some corruption, some. But I feel very happy that progress has been made. The government are very determined to crack down on the corruption and has taken a lot of measures. I'm confident about the bright future of South Africa and about the future of China-South Africa cooperation.
Minister, let's bring you back into the conversation. Since 1994, we've had largely pro-business policies. I don't know if anyone disagrees. And yet FDI, to the extent at which it was expected, hasn't come to South Africa. Business people I spoke to in the build-up to US President Barack Obama's visit to South Africa said simply that US companies were wary because they had to grease too many palms in order to do business in South Africa. Do you think the issue of corruption is a legitimate reason for why investment hasn't come, or why big business is sitting on stockpiles of investment instead of investing?
Well, Hajra, business globally is a very interesting phenomenon. Reality is there are very, very few countries where investment flows would have been as good as it have been if all of us globally did not experience global economic and financial crisis, which started, by the way, in the US. So said President Obama. About 2 weeks ago, there was a report of the EU Commission of more than $1 billion worth of corruption. I'm being very economic with the actual figure. That stunned many European citizens about just the level of corruption in Europe per annum, the whole of the EU. Nobody says, so investment flows are stopped by this. Corruptors know no borders. I think what we should be focusing on is, globally, we all have to fight against the scourge of corruption, whether it happens in developed countries or in developing countries. More so in developing countries because it has a potential to undermine the good work, particularly of the entire the social fabric, as you had said. I've traveled all over the world as a young ambassador for more than 11 years. I've been minister for almost 5 years. I really haven't come across a country where we do not get the praises I think we deserve, that South Africa has a good story to tell about the work we've done in just but 20 years after 400 years of untold corruption. Nobody was talking about corruption, by the way, before 1994. Recently, the Department of Economic Development, through the Competition Board, came up with what is popularly known as collusion by big infrastructure-built companies worth billions. When it's by the small man, it's corruption. When it's by big companies, it was called collusion. But what is very, very critical is the South African government has the determination to fight the big and the small and call them by the rightful name. But also to say that the anti-corruption drive in South Africa is not led by business. It's largely encouraged and championed by this government. So despite all the challenges, which we admit that as much as we have achieved what we have achieved in 20 years, we are still rewriting the wrongs or correcting the wrongs. But we really have a good story to tell, because 20 years versus 400 years, it will not take us 400 years. to be where we are today.
There's a reason I wanted to stop you at that point. I wanted
The minister's that corruption is by no means restricted to any single country or any group of country. And a lot of reference is made to corruption in developing countries. Of course, it is to be roundedly criticized, and it dampens our progress. But I think the important thing is the instrumentalities to deal with that, and I think as the Chinese ambassador said. Insofar as I can tell you, the feedback from the Indian investors, and we have them coming in hordes. Almost every week I meet some investor or the other from India who's bringing in either acquisitions or new investments. Look, when we look at the market here, you look at the comparative advantage, and you look at situation prevailing in the other developing countries, other African countries.
Before we go to comparative advantage, and I'm going to come back to that, let's go to the UK ambassador. The business in the UK is accused of colluding with the National Party government in South Africa for a long time to make a lot of money. There has been an argument that perhaps those big businesses, those big mining companies, for example, who still operate in South Africa, and who, by the way, South Africa opens the door for to get into Africa, should be paying some sort of damages. Could you weigh in on that?
Well, I think I would weigh in behind my colleagues, actually, and the minister, in the sense that I think absolutely corruption is something which is happening everywhere. And in the UK, we've brought in one of the strictest UK bribery and corruption acts, which has jurisdiction overseas as well. So people working in South Africa with South African companies will be liable to that. And that's an important outreach, so it's not just one side. And I think, yes, I think also I was going to say that in the G20, but also in the we have bribery and corruption. That's also another area we're focusing on. But also, just last year, one of the big themes that came out of the G8, and which has gone worldwide, is more transparency and more work on international taxation.
In terms of transparency, some Western countries are accused of legitimizing corruption through making official lobbyists and big donations to the party that are transparent, while in South Africa, because it's not lobbyists doing the lobbying, it's closed door meetings behind locked doors or politicians walking around in gardens getting black binfuls of money, that it's different, but it's the exact same sort of thing.
But I think in almost every country, that process is becoming more transparent, basically. Laws are being introduced to make lobbying more transparent, to essentially name names and to sort of put it out there for everyone to see. And I was thinking back to South Africa. South Africa last year joined a pilot of countries that are automatically releasing tax information to other countries so that perhaps big companies cannot just be in one country but not be taxed in that country or be taxed elsewhere. And that work on tax evasion is critically important because it has affected the developing world more, with flows going out of the country untaxed. So I think there's a lot more to do. Let's not be naive. But I think, you can see through the various mechanisms, be it OECD, be it G20, be it G8, doubtless be it the BRICS. I think everybody is very now aware of the harm that corruption does. But I was also thinking back to your earlier question, Hajra, about, what affects investors. And I think one of the questions that we diplomats wrestle with is perceptions of a country from outside. I think the ambassador was saying, I don't recognise that image. And, sometimes you do read in the press things that you say, hey, this just isn't what it's like in my country. And I think one of the things that increasingly 21st century diplomats do is to be active in the sort of public diplomacy, the telling about your country to others, because when traders get to a country, they often find it's nothing like as difficult to trade in as perhaps the outside world, or it's insecure, or whatever it is. So the people-to-people links and activity, which maybe you'd like to come on to, I think is critical for that, just as it were, informing all of these processes better.
In terms of the people-to-people link, let's go back to India for a second. South Africa is criticised for having too strict labour laws. What is our competitive advantage from your perspective?
Well, I won't talk about the labour laws. There are issues and there are issues in every country. And labor laws are not the only input into investment decisions.
What is our competitive
when I said
advantage?
competitive advantage, of course, South Africa has a enormously, good infrastructure, financial infrastructure, the connectivity, rule of law, and that plays a very important factor in the investment decisions, because if there is a problem, then the investor knows that there is something to knock at. And in that respect, I mean, in India and South Africa, countries like us have a huge advantage. This is what places South Africa at a tremendous advantage as compared to many other African countries. So I think in terms of comparative advantage, yes. And as I was telling you, I have not received any major complaints from the Indian investors with regard to the corruption issue. And primarily the reason is, to my mind, is because South Africa follows a very liberalized economic policy.
To Russia?
Just a brief introduction. First of all, I'd like to support my Indian colleague and remind about the international ratings which show the place of the country in terms of the conditions for doing business. And South Africa fares quite well in this respect. This is what I am telling to Russian businessmen.
And are they accepting it? What are the concerns of Russian businessmen when they look at South Africa as a possible place to invest?
I wouldn't be speaking about concerns. I would rather speak about the habits, because a lot of Russian businessmen prefer to deal with their European neighbors or with China, which are geographically closer. And it is a matter of getting more information about South Africa, its comparative advantages, conditions of doing business here, which would allow for more Russian business to come to this country. We are doing some exchanges by business delegations, and we do intend to bring a fairly large Russian business delegation to South Africa in the second half of this year. DTI does a good job by sending their missions to Russia regularly, and we hear from them about what goes on in South Africa. We work with our South African partners through ITEC, the Intergovernmental Bilateral Commission, which Minister Mashabane heads on the South African side. And we are in continuous dialogue about business, about the conditions, and we're moving forward quite well.
I'd like to bring China into the conversation. As a journalist, I report what I see. That is my job. And I see a lot of Chinese tourists in South Africa. Does the high crime rate, does the headlines about 40 people being murdered in some South African cities not bother Chinese tourists?
Really, there's an increasing number of Chinese tourists coming to South Africa. Last year, it reached 150,000. It's 20% over the previous year, though it's a very small number compared to the total number. The total number last year of Chinese tourists was 93.2 million tourists. They were worried about the security. However, what I feel glad is that when they come here, they found they see so many places, so many beautiful landscape, culture, so many things that they don't know beforehand. So that's why I suggested that you need more promote South Africa, then to attract more tourists, including Chinese tourists, to come here.
To Brazil, your economic success and President Lula da Silva's economic success was attributed largely to dealing with corruption hands-on, and not allowing it to fester. What did you do differently compared to what we are doing today?
I don't think we do anything different. I think that, as everybody said, corruption is a plague that affects all of us. And as the British High Commissioner was saying, it is more, I mean, Brazil, South Africa, all of our countries are in the G20. And that is a common fight of our countries against corruption. We have huge problems of corruption in Brazil. What we do, we have also legislation, and we try to follow the legislation. Now there is a big national case involving President Lula's former chief of staff because of misuse of government money. Yes, yes, but he's been already judged by the High Court and has already sentenced. He's in jail, and that's what we try to do. But there is a huge, as the British High Commissioner said, it's a huge pressure from the public opinion for government and the judicial power to act firmly on this.
In terms of India, how do you view the economic challenges South Africa is facing, and what kind of solutions would you suggest we take up?
Well, you know, South Africa is doing fairly well, and many of the times, of course, media, for its own reasons, focuses on the negatives, and the good news is completely drowned out. And people begin to believe that as if nothing is happening. So I was very happy in that respect that President Zuma, in his State of the Nation address, reminded the people of so many good stories. There are challenges, of course, there are challenges before everybody. While you celebrate what you've achieved, you're also mindful, particularly in our countries, developing countries, that there are so many unmet challenges. As I would see as an outsider, actually, unemployment rate. One of the challenges that we face in our developing countries, and the health of economy cannot really be measured only in terms of macroeconomic numbers. It is the degree of inclusiveness. And South African government, I think, is moving in that direction. They're committed to bringing about an inclusive development. And that remains a big challenge. I think the government is already moving in that direction and bringing about policy framework. And the private sector has to support it as well.
So, in other words, crisis, what crisis? After the break, we ask our international diplomats based in South Africa what their advice is for the South African government, and we wrap up with the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Maeti Nkwane Mashabane. Back after this. Welcome back to Political Edge. We've been in conversation with China, Brazil, the United Kingdom, Russia, as well as India. And so far, they all seem to agree that South Africa has a good story to tell. Let's wrap up the conversation now with their advice for South Africans and the South African government. China, you have the floor.
Okay. China, South Africa, and other BRICS members, I think, are facing similar opportunities, similar challenges, and similar tasks. Though our national conditions are different, we have gained very successful experiences in the state governance, social development, and economic development. I think BRICS countries can further strengthen the exchanges of experiences in the state governance and also in economic and social development.
Let's be direct. What is your advice for the South African government?
In fact, the National Development Plan for the next 20 years has identified the challenges, the reasons, the causes, the targets, and the route to realize the targets.
So China's just endorsed the National Development Plan of South Africa.
This is your dream, and we have our own dream. Working together, we can realize our respective dreams.
Let's go to Brazil. your advice for South Africans and the South African government?
Brazilian foreign policy is based on a number of principles. And one of them, which we adhere to firmly, is non-intervention. So Brazil does not give any advice to any foreign country.
But do you intervene in your own businesses and in your own sectors of the economy in Brazil?
Oh, that's the internal, yes, sphere of action of the government. Yes.
So what is your advice to South Africans?
I don't have any advice. I think that South Africa, me personally, I would say that South Africa has to find, and South Africa certainly finds its own way to the future.
Let's give the floor to India.
Well, I can't be presumptuous to give advice.
To South Africans, if not the South African government.
Look, in today's world, through many partnerships, and I'm happy that Chinese ambassador referred to BRICS, and India and South Africa share a platform at many such forums. And we learn from each other. So we don't have to reinvent the wheels in our own respective countries. What I can tell you is that I get a lot of inquiries, and there is obviously a lot of interest here in these small and medium enterprises. That's an area where India has done a lot of work through, firstly, a very robust policy framework, and which supported and encouraged the development and evolution of these smaller scale industries. And I think that is an area which I'm sure South African government and the entrepreneurs will be looking at exploring in the future.
To Russia, Russian business played a huge role in terms of building the country. Should business in South Africa be playing a stronger role in building South Africa?
So you're not asking me to give an advice. About the advice, still. I think that the people and the government of the country, of a country, always know better. And if I am asked an advice by South African government, I would give it, but I would give it quiet. I wish that South Africa very shortly becomes an even better place than it has become now. I wish that our bilateral relations continue to evolve. I wish that BRICS becomes stronger and stronger, because this, I think we should have given a bit more attention to this phenomenon, which has brought us all more in the international limelight. By the way, I'd like to congratulate once again South Africa on conducting a very successful BRICS summit March last year. I wish that business does more within BRICS, and there is a business dimension in BRICS as well, helping all of us, both directly and in partnership with the government, to make all our countries generally, and South Africa in particular, stronger and stronger.
To the United Kingdom, before you give advice to South Africa and South Africans, you didn't answer my question earlier about whether businesses who benefited from apartheid and who are still operational and doing quite well in South Africa today should be taxed higher or pay some sort of damages.
I think I'm in the camp of no advice, because you don't. I just hope very much that South Africa will continue to do what it's doing in terms of its regional foreign policy and its regional security, excellent work in Africa to help other countries, and to develop regional prosperity. In part because it's the right thing to do, but also I think that that's something that foreign investors are also interested in, which is through South Africa to work through the supply chains and to take that wealth out. And I don't have a specific comment on whether a company should be taxed differently from another company. I would just say that from my perspective, UK companies are incredibly interested in working in and with South Africa. British people are incredibly interested in coming here with the biggest number of tourists. We want to incredibly increase that number of people going backwards and forwards, teachers, scholars, scientists, The BRIC meeting of science and technology here, I think, was a great innovation. And we had in parallel a bilateral science and innovation conference. Let's join them together. But essentially, there's a big field, I think, of activity which will benefit everybody in South Africa, which is to unite our forces.
Does the UK feel threatened by the BRICS countries' involvement in South Africa and in Africa?
No, not at all. Not at all. We have a huge relationship with trading relationship with India, with China. My Prime Minister was just in China a month ago. £6 billion pounds worth of contracts were signed. I think the world is a diverse place. I think countries need to have diverse markets, but I think there's opportunity in every single country to deal and to gain more growth and prosperity with the others. So no, I think we all want to improve the life of every citizen inside each of those countries. It's a very common goal.
If I can add, BRICS is certainly not directed against anything. And in fact, we are very clear in our mind that it is not bringing about any negative impact on any relationship.
To the Minister, we've dealt with the perception. Now let's talk reality. What are South Africa's priorities going forward? And which strategic partnerships and relations should we be watching closely?
Well, the South African foreign policy is anchored on our African agenda, on the diplomacy of Ubuntu, on the history we share with many of the excellencies around this table, of continuing to work informed by our national priorities as we interact with the global community. Okay. As we move forward, Hajra, we know that 20 years of our struggle of post-apartheid, the new struggle for development, peace, security, and all in our country and in our own neighborhood, deal with the three challenges of poverty still remaining, large pockets of poverty in almost all our BRICS countries. And as the British High Commissioner said, even in developed countries now, but largely from our developing world side. Poverty, unemployment or underemployment, and inequity. These are the triple challenges that we'll focus on. We will continue with all humility, thinking globally, to continue acting also domestically or at home to continue solving these challenges that I referred to. This South Africa is a product of our people's struggle. As we celebrate the 20th anniversary of our freedom, led by President Zuma, we would continue remembering that there's international solidarity. We will continue strengthening our relations with countries of the South, championing the African agenda, informed now by our African agenda, but also remembering that we will continue playing that role of a bridge, of a dialogue between North and South. We are just one unique country that has relatives from both developed and the developing, but we're largely a developing country. With all these challenges, we think, from the feedback you're also getting around this table, that indeed, under the leadership of President Zuma, we've got a good story to tell.
We have a good story to tell, but have we spent too much time being nice? And if we were not as nice to everyone around the table, could we have gone further in skewing trade relations in our favor?
The diplomacy of Ubuntu says, I am because you are, champions African agenda. The UN Human Development Report says that South Africa still remains the best investment destination, says that South Africa is still the biggest investor on the continent, says the Ernst & Young report says we are still the best country viewed by a business to invest in. So we think we've kept the balance, remaining nice, but also championing the cause of development, respect of international law, human rights. We're back in the Human Rights Council. We have to keep the balance, but remember that telling a good story is excellent. But also listening to the comments made by the Excellencies, the ambassadors here. During the break, I said to you, it's so gratifying as a former ambassador to listen that none of us here was really thumb-sucking or creating stories to make each other feel good, but we were making references to experiences that we all have. I think that makes us to think that indeed South Africa has been good in balancing humility and making sure that that does not equal to timidity. That we will continue punching within our weight. We will continue championing the cause of the poor and the underprivileged from the developing South, but we will keep good relations with the developed North.
Transparency International said that corruption is an issue in South Africa. The ANC is in election campaign right now, and street sheets and internal polling suggest that members within the ANC wants the leadership to take corruption more seriously. Do we have some work to do in cleaning our own backyard before we ask international investors to have confidence in us?
Actually, this good conversation that you have had here today say that our friends internationally know that we are always, when we have challenges, as the Chinese ambassador had said, we have done our own introspection and we have come out openly, transparently with our national development plan that says this is where we were, this is where we are, this is where we want to be, working together with our people.
In terms of access to Africa, opening up for trade deals, putting people on the plane, international business on the plane, should we not be getting something back in terms of allowing or giving access to the continent? Should being on the plane or having access to deals in the DRC and in other places in the contract do not be tied with conditions that you will deliver for the South African economy in South Africa? As China does, as Russia does, as the UK does, as India
diplomacy
does, and as
of
Brazil
want to
did.
say, Hajra, I am because our people are. If we sign hydroelectricity project with the DRC, it's good for the DRC, it's good for South Africa because it's going to offer not only affordable electricity but clean energy, not only to South Africa and the DRC, but the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. So the things we do, we make good use of the access we have, but we also know that South Africa is an integral part of this continent, and that indeed, if we're championing African agenda, we should prosper ourselves and our neighborhood.
Minister, thank you for having us. Your Excellencies, thank you for joining in on the discussions. And to all of you at home, constructive debate and discussion right here on Political Edge. Siyabonga kakhulu.